It seems like lately, every time you turn around, there's some kind of big economic news story breaking. And a lot of you have messaged us about one in particular from Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025.
Yeah?
It's former President Trump and his announcement about all these new tariffs. So we wanted to do a little deep dive into that for you today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he really kind of dropped a bombshell with this new round of tariffs. I mean, it
Yeah.
wasn't just a little change here or there.
Yeah.
It was really a pretty major announcement. And the big news is this new 10% import tax on.
Those numbers are pretty eye-popping. And it makes you wonder if we're, on the verge of some kind of global trade war.
Well, I mean, it's understandable to have that kind of reaction, right? The rhetoric that surrounded the announcement itself was, pretty strongly worded.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't hold back at all. I mean, he actually used the words
Yeah.
looted, pillaged, raped, plundered.
Yeah.
I mean,
Those are.
those are strong words,
Yeah.
And then he goes on to call this Liberation Day.
It's certainly a way to frame it right.
Yeah.
He's really painting a picture that, America's been taken advantage of and that these tariffs are kind of this, necessary step to save the economy and American jobs.
And that's his whole argument, right? That this is going to fix this, so-called broken trade system
Right.
and bring back all those manufacturing jobs that have been lost.
Right.
Now, on the surface, that sounds good to a lot of people. I mean, who wouldn't want to see more factories in the U.S.? But, we're doing this deep dive for you, the listener, because we really need to look at what are the real world impacts of this?
Absolutely.
Are the costs going to outweigh the benefits? That's what we're going to try to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, everyone likes the idea of bringing manufacturing back to the U.S., but you can't ignore the immediate impact this is going to have on prices of imported goods.
Yeah.
And with so many things being made with parts from all over the world,
Yeah.
those price increases are just going to get passed along to the consumer over and over again.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. Your car, your clothes, your electronics, even your food.
Yeah.
I mean, so much of that stuff either comes from overseas or uses parts from overseas. So everything's probably going to get more expensive. And we've actually seen some projections about how much this could cost the average person, right?
Yeah, Yale's Budget Lab, they did an analysis where they looked at a 20% tariff across the board, and they estimated that it would cost the average American family an extra $3,400 to $4,200 every year. So even though the actual tariffs that were announced are different for different countries,
Right.
that gives you an idea of the potential impact on your wallet.
That's a lot of money. I mean, this whole idea that, foreign companies are going to be the ones paying for this,
Yeah.
it's starting to feel like it's actually going to be all of us paying for it. And it's not just about the day-to-day expenses either, right? I mean, the stock market had a pretty strong reaction to this as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
We saw a lot of volatility in the markets as investors tried to figure out what this all means for company profits, for global supply chains, and for economic growth as a whole.
So not exactly a vote of confidence,
I mean, uncertainty tends to make people nervous.
for sure. Now, we did hear from Peter Navarro. He's a trade advisor in the White House, and he's actually projecting that these tariffs are going to generate like $600 billion in new revenue every year.
Right.
I mean, if that's true, that's a ton of money.
Yeah, it is, but that's assuming that people keep buying the same amount of stuff from overseas,
Right.
even with the higher prices. And if people start buying less because things are more expensive, then that revenue number could be way off.
That makes sense. And then we also heard from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who suggested that these tariffs could actually be negotiated downward later on. I mean, it sounds like maybe these initial tariffs are more of a starting point for negotiation than a final deal.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, it could be a way to kind of put pressure on other countries to make concessions in trade talks. But it also creates a lot of uncertainty for businesses because they don't know what the rules are going to be in the long run.
Right. So here at home, we've got this potential for more government revenue, but also the possibility of higher costs for everyone. But what about the rest of the world? I mean, I can't imagine everyone's thrilled about this.
No, definitely not. The countries that are being hit with these higher tariffs are obviously concerned about what it means for their exports to the U.S.
Yeah.
Canada, for example, has already been through some trade disputes with the U.S.
Right.
And they're probably not too happy about this.
And the European Union, they're not just going to sit back and take this, are they? I mean, there's been talk of retaliation.
Yeah, the EU has actually announced that they're planning to put tariffs on about $28 billion worth of American goods.
Wow.
So this is exactly the kind of tit-for-tat situation that can lead to a trade war where everyone ends up losing in the end.
Yeah, it's like everyone's trying to protect their own interests, but in doing so, they're actually hurting everyone else. And even Italy's prime minister is calling for calm and trying to de-escalate the situation.
Which shows you just how worried people are about the global trade system falling apart.
Yeah, it's definitely a tense situation.
Yeah.
Now, back here in the U.S., White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has said that April 2nd, 2025, will go down as one of the most important days in modern American history.
Hmm.
It's hard to argue that this isn't a pivotal moment, but it's still way too early to say what the long-term consequences are going to be.
It really could go either way, right?
Yeah.
It depends on how the economy reacts and what
Yeah.
other countries do in response.
Now, as you might expect, the reaction here in the U.S. has been pretty divided along party lines. Democrats have been very critical of this, haven't they?
Oh, yeah. Representative Susan Delbini has called this chaos and dysfunction,
Wow.
which is, how she tends to characterize a lot of the former president's policies.
Yeah.
And Heather Boushey has pointed out that when Trump imposed tariffs during his first term, they didn't actually lead to a big increase in manufacturing jobs in the U.S.
So it makes you wonder, is there really any evidence that these tariffs are actually going to work?
I mean, the research on this is kind of mixed.
Yeah.
And it really depends on the industry and the overall global economic situation. I mean, tariffs can make imported goods more expensive, so they can make domestic products more competitive, but also makes it more expensive for American companies that use imported parts in their own manufacturing processes.
Right.
So it can actually hurt some American companies and lead to job losses in other sectors.
So it's not a simple solution.
Not at all. And it's interesting that even within the Republican Party, there seems to be some hesitation about all this.
Yeah.
House Speaker Mike Johnson just said, "We'll see how it all develops," which doesn't exactly sound like a ringing endorsement.
No, it doesn't. It sounds like even some of his own party members are a little worried about what might happen. And this time, it's not just steel and aluminum that are being targeted, right? We're hearing about potential tariffs on a whole bunch of other things that could have a direct impact on our lives.
Absolutely. I mean, there's talk of tariffs on pharmaceuticals,
Right.
lumber, copper, computer chips.
Yeah.
I mean, those things affect pretty much every aspect of the economy.
Yeah.
Pharmaceuticals affect healthcare costs.
Yeah.
Lumber affects housing and construction.
Mm.
Copper is used in tons of manufactured products. And computer chips are at the heart of all our technology.
Right.
So these tariffs could really drive up prices across the board.
Yeah.
Everything from your medicine to your laptop could get more expensive.
So it seems like we're really taking a big gamble here. I mean, there's a chance that this could achieve some of the goals that have been laid out. But there's also a very real chance that it could backfire and end up hurting a lot of people. And it's all happening without the usual congressional approval process for this kind of thing.
Which is another thing that's making people nervous. I mean, the executive branch does have some power over trade, but these tariffs are so big and so sweeping that it's raising questions about whether this is really how trade policy should be made.
So we've covered a lot of ground here today. We've talked about the initial announcement, the potential impact on your wallet, the international repercussions, and the political divisions here at home.
Yeah.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I think the big question is, what are the unintended consequences of all this?
Right.
I mean, it's not just about prices at the store or what happens to the stock market.
Yeah.
What other surprises are waiting for us down the road? It feels like we're only at the beginning of this story. What are your final thoughts on that?
I mean, it's really hard to say what's going to happen, but I think it's important to remember that the global economy is incredibly complex and interconnected. So any change this big is going to have ripple effects that we can't even predict right now. I think we all need to pay close attention to how this plays out and be prepared for the unexpected.
I think that's great advice. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive. It'll be interesting to see where all this goes from here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to all of you listening, thanks for tuning in. We'll keep you updated as this story develops.
Yes, stay tuned.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.